Here we are today with our fourth episode, I believe, of the FacDev podcast. And I'm Sarah Gander, a pediatrician here in St. John and your host for the podcast. I am so pumped today because we are doing part 2 of our millennial podcast. So you can see the first part with Dr. Rochelle Willette from Fredericton, where we discussed a lot of the generational differences between our learners and ourselves. But today, I actually get to do the part 2 with an actual learner. So today I get to welcome Naythrah Thevathasan. So thank you for coming today. I will let you describe your background for our listeners.
Well, thank you for having me. So as Dr. Gander mentioned, my name is Naythrah Thevathasan. I'm a second-year medical student at Dalhousie Medicine, New Brunswick. I'm originally from Guelph, Ontario, which is a small little hippy-dippy town that I love so dearly. My background is a little bit interesting. I took an interesting route to get to medicine. I did my undergraduate degree at the University of Guelph in biomedical sciences, and then I did a master's degree in public health. And I was so in love with the field that I actually worked as a public health promoter for a few years before getting into medicine. So my lens is a little biased, I will say, but I think it is a super important lens to have, especially as I move forward in my medical career. So I'm so excited to be here today.
So those of you who know me know that obviously Naythrah and I were fast friends with her background, really having extensive knowledge of the social determinants of health. And then also I'm very much hoping a budding pediatrician. But today I really thought it was relevant to have a learner on the show to really talk about that perspective of being in our clinics, being in our tutorials, being on the receiving end of our teaching. And I think just by your introduction of yourself, Naythrah, look at how important it is to know the background about your learner who's with you. A learner is not a learner is not a learner these days. The diversity of experiences and backgrounds is really quite remarkable. Do you think it's important for us as teachers to really understand where our students are coming from?
Oh, 100%. You know, I think there's this Maya Angelou quote that I love so much is, when you know better, you do better. And I think in the same way for teachers, when you know your students, you can teach them better. Mm-hmm. And one of the things when we've been working together that I've loved so much is that the very first interaction we ever had when I did an elective with you, you sat me down and you were like, what are you all about? Tell me a little bit more about you. What was your background like? What makes you excited when you wake up in the morning? And it's funny because a lot of the pieces that got me excited got you excited. And it made our learning relationship so amazing, and the opportunities that we created for ourselves and trying to get the most out of it, that I think it can become so rewarding and so beneficial, and it can really help to tailor the time that you spend with one another.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think it's nice as faculty, we do really care about learning about the students and knowing about them. Sometimes we feel, I think, like we don't have time, or I don't know if any of the listeners think that maybe sometimes we feel like we're being nosy or we're not meant to ask you these things. But I do find it fascinating. The assumptions that we make about our learners probably come from our lack of knowledge of where they are. Just as something as simple as, Naythrah looked disinterested in clinic today, but if I happen to know that you had a commitment at 5 o'clock and, we all get antsy when we feel like time's closing in on our next commitment, it's nice to know where our students are coming from. But yet as faculty, we need to balance particularly the clinical years with this is the job and you're with me till the job's done and this sort of thing. So any advice about how faculty can come to terms with the fact that you guys, I joke sometimes, and I made this joke at lunch, was, do you have to finish the school that you were building in Haiti at 5 o'clock because we accepted you to med school with this diverse background and these interests, and so we can't expect them to just stop the day that you get into medicine and are on our schedule, but yet you're paying tuition to be on our schedule and learn from us in a mentorship apprentice type role. Mm-hmm. So it was a really long, convoluted way of saying, how do we balance and reconcile those two things?
Yeah. Well, I think it is really important, especially in the profession that you're in and I'm aspiring to be in. There is this really strong held belief, and it's very much so true, that duty calls, and that is kind of the nature of the beast, especially when it comes to medicine. You have to be willing to put in the long hours. You have to be willing to be diligent when you mentally, physically, socially may not feel like you're fully there. And that's kind of what the training demands of you. And so there is a part of, I think, your question where, absolutely, I fully agree with you. Like, you kind of have to be a little bit hard on your learners sometimes, of just letting them know, we're going to push through. It's going to be okay. And we're going to make it to the end. In the same breath, I think, the learner of today is very different than the learner of 10, 12 years ago, where, they do have competing interests and they do have other competing priorities. And, I think a big thing is just being open and honest and having that communication of, what it is that you're investing your time into, because I think a lot of times when you're working with someone, maybe they don't fully understand, all the competing interests that are in your world, it's because they don't know about the things that are in your world, so, being able to say, I'm okay that I'm not okay, and letting, your teacher know that, like, these are some of the things that you're dealing with right now in this picture of your life, and saying, I'm asking for help and I'm asking for support. And is it okay if I come in 20 minutes earlier of the day so I can leave 20 minutes earlier so I can make that commitment and make the learning experience so much more beneficial for you and me? Is that a buy-in that we can agree upon? And I think those are conversations that most people are open to, but they just don't have, because, sometimes learners feel afraid to put that out there. And, I think historically in medicine, you have this, these power dynamics, which is a huge factor, especially as a student, to be able to navigate that. We're often told you stay quiet and you do what the doctor tells you, which is totally fine, especially when you're learning and you're trying to, grasp all the basic concepts. But I think now that relationship is changing a little bit between teacher and learner, where you're able to have these open and honest conversations of just saying, you're my teacher, but you're also my support system, and I want to support you too.
Oh, wow,
so how can we make that work?
You're also my support system.
Yeah.
There's so many segues into the things that we wanted to talk about. One of them being, is there value in setting up expectations at the beginning of a relationship, whether it be an elective experience or a rotation or a week long with, say, somebody in a hospitalist service, or even just the clinic day? And one trick that has worked for me, although I don't always do it because, some days you're on your game and some days you aren't, is saying to people at the beginning of the day, listen, this is my day. This is what I have to get done. This is how I typically do it. What are your expectations from the day? And where do you need to be? Because then I find that it flows a lot better after that. And that was something that when I spoke to you about it, you felt like that is very helpful, about just being able to have the flow of the day. The reason why I thought this was important to talk about was because the moments of, oh my gosh, I have a learner, I really have to do my charts right after the patient because I have an end game here of getting out at 5 o'clock and I don't want to turn my back to you as a learner. But if I say to you at the beginning of the day, listen, I've got to double time it to get through the day today because I'm going on vacation and I can't have these charts sitting here at 5 o'clock. You go do you at lunchtime or whatever. That might actually open up the conversation for expectations for you too. So you don't feel like, oh my God, I'm on my phone and they're seeing me on my phone and whatever.
Yeah.
Any thoughts on that?
I remember when you brought this point up to me, I was saying, that's a huge deal. I wish all the physicians that I worked with and the teachers I've been, that I've been learning from in my past education did that. I think having a groundwork and having a framework will always work for you, both as a teacher and both as a learner. I think so many times in education, we talk about objectives, we talk about goals, we talk about where we want to be. Well, why can't it be the same when you're practically being taught, to have that foresight, to be able to say, these are the things we're going to do. Why don't you go home tonight and have some time to think about that, maybe come prepared, do a little bit of reading. And it doesn't have to be onerous. I know something that you had mentioned, you had said, well, isn't that stressful of just adding more work onto an already busy schedule? But I think it doesn't have to be onerous. Like, I think you can take a little bit of time to feel a little bit more prepared and to feel comfortable. And it just makes the flow of the day so much more enjoyable, not only for you, but also for your teacher, because when you know more and you can bring more to the table, it continues to add on that knowledge and make the whole experience, I think, more stronger for both of you guys.
I really vow to encourage my learners to come a little early to clinic. I've said it before, and it's not hard at all to pull a little review article or something about, like, I see a lot of ADHD and behavioral problems. So, you pull out the Cadre guideline booklet and you say to your learner, listen, I'm going to walk in probably at the strike of 9 when my clinic starts because I have all the other things in my life that I try to deal with. But, have your coffee in my office at 8:15 and flip through the charts and this little review article, and you'll be really ready to hit the ground running with me. And I think consolidate a lot of knowledge in a different way. And then what a beautiful measure of engagement when we go to do some evaluations or, offer some constructive feedback, formative feedback. If you had come a little earlier and read the charts, you would have felt like you were a little bit more prepared, and rather than just this perpetual feedback of read more around your patients and things that are not necessarily that constructive for learners. Awesome. And I think that the other segue that I thought that it brought to light for me was also that hidden curriculum of how do we mentor and teach, I guess, learners about how to get through what is a very hectic schedule. So you might have a meeting at 5:00 you're trying to get to. Chances are I'm trying to get to a meeting at 5:00 or pick up my kids or whatever. This is how you navigate the every doctor's always 10 minutes late phenomenon, or how can we be the change and lean out of that system and say, well, how can we make sure we're done at 4:45? So we're not always late. Again, anybody who knows me is probably laughing out loud because I'm always late. But being that change it's so easy to strategize in St. John, particularly because, parking's not always an issue. Traffic's not always an issue. But one of the RIM students wanted to interview me for her qualitative project last week. And I said, okay, let's meet in the Y Cafe at 11:15 and I'll be with you for 45 minutes because I'm vowing on Fridays to go to yoga at lunch at the Y. And that starts at 12:10. So you have me for 45 minutes and setting up that expectation, but also getting my butt out of the hospital. So I was already there and ready was just a strategy. And hopefully that was a cool message to that student that, you don't always have to meet in this one place. You don't always have to do it this way.
Yeah.
How can you do things differently?
I think that's amazing. I think as just humans really like structure. We really like order. We really like getting into these really comfortable patterns of doing and being, and it's funny, as you were telling me your experiences, I was getting flashbacks of my public health days of working as a public health promoter, and when we have our meetings, it's kind of this untold expectation of like, you can stand up, you can do laps around the room, go and have a snack, go and get a glass of water, go and, engage yourself in different ways. And, it's strange now looking back because it may look crazy, but the expectation was kind of all out there because we want to create an environment that's healthy and beneficial for everyone. So we want to welcome, things that are a little bit abnormal to some, but very normal for us. And that's okay.
The walking meeting.
The walking meetings. Yeah. Those are the best.
I remember meeting RIM students and being like, let's go meet at the zoo trail. And there's slush on the ground. Yeah. And there's always like one out of the three that would show up in like heels. And I'm like, oh, no. No. And then it happened to me. So like so like, oh, why would they meet me at the zoo trail in like heels? And then John Dornan, who's like, the chief of staff for Horizon, when I became department head, he's like, oh, let's meet for a walking meeting. And I like showed up in like moccasin slippers in the winter. And he's like, no. Like, happens to all of us.
Yeah, it does.
Because it's so out of the norm. that not everybody has their winter boots and their like ice spikes in the back of their car. But maybe those are the things we need to model to say, you know what, that's the only way we're going to sustain and survive and try to tackle this, you know, super unhealthy actually process that is happening and not getting any better in a lot of ways. So segue into technology, because I just came off of a little bit of vacation and the amount of emails in my inbox is like gives me heartburn. But technology is a huge issue when it comes to the interface of learners and faculty, mainly because we hate seeing people on their phones, even though we're on our phones all the time too. So it's a double standard in a lot of ways, but it gets tied up into professionalism and whatnot. What's your experience with that? I know you haven't had your clinical stuff yet, but I'm sure you've seen issues.
Well, I think for the most part, you know, most physicians have been quite welcoming the fact of, you know, allowing us to like bring our tablets and bring our cell phones and have that as kind of our access point to taking notes and looking up things and, you know, connecting the dots. Because oftentimes, you know, things are being told to us that we genuinely don't know what's going on. And the times when we're looking down on our phone and looking down on our iPad or whatever it happens to be, like we're trying to look cool, like we're trying to gather that information as fast as possible so we can engage in the conversation and show that we care and we want to learn and we want to do better. So a lot of times, you know, that's kind of been the majority of my experiences. But I've also had encounters, you know, where I've walked into certain scenarios and immediately, you know, if classmates of mine bring out their iPad, like there is a resistance because sometimes there's a bit of a way of thinking that, you know, having your technology in front of your face shows that you're not being engaged, that you're not thinking, that you're not actually actively working through the clinical scenario at hand. And, you know, some could argue one way or the other. I think it's just a different way of being now. You know, you walk into our classroom and everyone has some sort of a device in front of them. Like there's probably a handful of people, myself included, that actually take notes by hand still.
Old school.
I like it. I just like the feeling of paper, but my back is getting tired. I need to switch soon. I'm carrying all my papers around. But, you know, it's just different. And times are changing. Generations are changing.
Yeah, and chances are that's where people have made their notes for their tutorial or what have you.
Exactly.
Or that's how they're taking notes. So what I'm hearing from you is that the feedback I get from faculty is that screens in front of learners are looked at as being a measure of disengagement. But what I'm hearing from you is that arguably it's actually your measure of being engaged because it's your lifeline to information or where your notes are or what have you. We've always said, though, well, it's kind of like parenting, you know, the best Facebook is actually face-to-face or like it's some kind of meme like that is out there for child development. But I think I really find, too, that we need to model that change. And there's been loads of times, because I know the feeling, because I get the feeling when I'm on my phone around my kids, is that you're half listening to the student or you're half listening to whatever else is going on. And meanwhile, you're checking a page or checking, and just reflexively, because it's an addictive phenomenon, you jump to the app that is your social media or what have you, and like isn't necessarily appropriate at the time, and we're victims of that too. So again, another opportunity to model professional behavior and how to navigate those things and patient perspectives, because if the phone's out during the patient encounter, that sends a message that maybe society isn't ready to see their doctors on their phone all the time yet.
Yeah.
Interesting. Okay. So I think that one disappointment that faculty have is trying to reconcile that students are not just younger versions of themselves. So, you know, it's the adage of like, well, when I was in school, you know, or like when it was me, we didn't have like, well, you know, the classic, of course, would be post-call days. And, you know, it actually happened last night. We were at a restaurant. We ended up chatting with another physician who was there, and we were talking about the CARMS match, because we're recording this just a few days after match day for the students at DMMB and across Canada. And he said, you know, he really felt for the students because in his day, they had the rotating internship and whatnot, and how you have to choose so early. So do you have any tips on how faculty can relate to you but show their wisdom, but how we can present it in a way that isn't like, in my day, you walked up the hill both ways to get to med school, snowstorm or no snowstorm.
Ooh, that's a really good question. You know what? I think it maybe goes back to what we've talked about in terms of just setting those expectations, you know, and having that open level of conversation. I think we've talked a lot about how often when either teachers or students are disappointed, it's just because their expectations haven't been met.
Right.
So
maybe it's like marriage. I need you to take out the recycling.
Maybe it is.
Or hire somebody to do it. I don't care how it goes. Just get it done.
But yeah, in a lot of ways it is like that, you know, trying to be open and honest of kind of what the experience is like for them and what the experience is like for you, and, you know, where the differences lie, and being understanding of that fact. You know, oftentimes, you know, when I sometimes maybe get feedback from people that say, you know, oh, well, my life is so different, or my experience is so different from what you're going through. You know, oftentimes I've been the one to say, you know, I would love to be a fly on the wall so that I can understand what your world looks like.
Right.
Because there's a learning in that too. And I think it goes beyond just the textbooks and the objectives in your curriculum. It's kind of the hidden curriculum that no one tells you about until you have to be an adult on your own.
Like when I dragged you to the policy change meeting?
Yeah.
Okay.
Exactly that. So for the listeners out there, Dr. Gander took me into a policy meeting that had nothing to really
to do with anything with you.
with anything that I was involved with or could have been involved with or could have spoken to. But what I will say is there was so much learning that happened for me in that meeting. You know, there's this process that you never see when it comes to how decisions are made in a hospital. And, you know, oftentimes as learners, we only get to see what the decision is. We don't get to see how the decision came to be. And understanding that due process, you know, is a form of learning that I think is so incredibly valuable. And it also helps me truly have a deeper appreciation of what your world looks like day to day. And, you know, how I could be involved one day as a physician if that's something that I want to, you know, go into and be a part of. And oftentimes I think that's something for me that I have found so valuable in my very young career, of just asking for those opportunities to say, can I be a fly on the wall? Like, can I just absorb whatever is going on? It may seem absolutely irrelevant to my learning and to my growth and whatever may be happening in my life, but 9 times out of 10, those experiences have been the most rewarding for me, of just understanding and learning and seeing what, you know, the world looks like once, you know, the pretty package of school disappears.
I love that you were so excited about that experience, which maybe you're just humoring me, but, you know, what it came out of a bit was you were doing an elective, and because I have an administrative role, there's only so many days that I'm seeing clinical patients, but yet I needed to keep you busy. And it occurred to me that, like, hey, why don't we expose students to some of these things that are frankly the reality of becoming, you know, being a physician, being involved in administrative activities. And then all of a sudden, capacity wise in the medical school, we're not always like, well, I don't have a clinic that day, so I can't take a student. And then you think, well, you know, obviously you don't want to sit and watch me do charts all day if I have some sort of paperwork time that I've scheduled, but meetings, if, you know, you're not in any sort of sticky kind of wicket about confidentiality or something, or like I think I was telling you, I was having somebody fill out the tax disability forms in my office the other day, which, like, you know, I had to redo, but it's not their fault. I just thought it was an interesting exercise for them to look at and understand. And then I could explain to them that, like, tax disability forms are protected by legislation and they're not great forms for children, but here we are. And we'd have to change actual law to make them change. And that's why you can't do that. And so I just thought it was of value too, because sometimes students are like, well, that seems ridiculous, and why don't they change that? You think, well, wouldn't I love to? But it'll take me 3 years and about 1,500 meetings with administrators to do that. And so then you learn how to pick your battles a little bit, or to understand the process. So but at the same time, I learned so much from you and my learners all the time, because, you know, you guys have figured some stuff out that we have not. It's a beautiful thing. You have, right?
Well, thank you.
Well, wouldn't I love to have a post-call day? No, it's really about learners coming with a diverse background, and like Naythrah, her knowledge of the social determinants of health and her background, it was nothing I knew of in any entirety at your stage of training. Mm-hmm. And so what a beautiful thing for us to be able to see where you can go in your career now, so much ahead of the game, really. And I think it's how we as faculty see our legacy as mentoring students, but then being able to say, okay, I'm doing some work that will never be finished. It feels good to know that the students coming after will pick up the ball and keep rolling with it. So that's a nice thing.
That's a really nice thing. That's very nice of you to say. I feel really humbled by that. Thank you.
So there's a lot of themes that we could have talked about when it comes to learners and faculty together and how we can do better. I really see that it's a mutual relationship, and the take-homes today are that you're not younger versions of ourselves. Mm-hmm. Times have changed. We need to adapt, but at the same time really model a higher wisdom and knowledge and experience in the system that you guys have started to really become enmeshed in. And, it's all about the patients and how to make patient care better, and setting up those expectations are really important. And so I vow to try to be more clear about my expectations. I always liken it to parenting, although that sounds derogatory to a student. But, when I say to my 7-year-old, wouldn't it be nice if you could maybe put your socks away? And he maybe looks up at me from his tablet and doesn't ever do it. Eddie, put your socks away. So I think if the students say to us, at the end of the day, I need you to fill out this feedback form and this EPA, and I say to them, I need to go for a walk at lunch because that's the only exercise I'm going to get. You can come with me or not, but that's happening, that we'll all just have a more harmonious education experience together.
For sure. I think, it's funny. It reminds me of something that Oprah says often. And for those of you who know me, I love Oprah. I was probably the youngest studio member of one of her
You went to one of her shows?
Yeah, in Hamilton. It was wild.
Who was the guest?
Well, it was her life class tour.
Oh.
And I dragged my little brother, and he was like, why am I here? And I'm like, we are seeing the queen. Sit down. This is what's happening. But, something that Oprah often says is, fundamentally as humans, all we want is to be seen, heard, and valued. And I think that, you just even having this talk about millennial learners and just wanting to hear about, what my experience has been like and how we can be better and do better. That's all anyone really wants. I think it goes both ways, right? For me to actually ask you the same things of what do you expect of me? What is your life like? How can I make it easier, better, help support you in your day to day? Those are all just little ways in which we can just hopefully really lean on each other, and just be a team. Because at the end of the day, yes, there is that power dynamic that exists, but we can also be a team too and get the job done.
Oh my gosh, I'd be crazy not to just let it go with that, because that was a beautiful end to our podcast today. And so thank you, Naythrah, for coming. Welcome. It's an honor to always spend time with you. And thank you to all our listeners for listening to the Fact Of podcast. Have a great day.